Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Personnel and General Purposes Subcommittee. I will read the Chair's introduction first, as you're all aware. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, taking an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and live streamed. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded, and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All escape routes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street, opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. Okay, just before we go to the first point, just to pre-warn members that there's a slight change to the order of the agenda items, so we'll be considering item 6 before item 5. Okay. Are there any substitutes? No. Thank you. And any declarations of interest? No. And any public participation? No, Chair. Thank you. So we'll move on to item 4, the minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of December, which I don't have very much knowledge of because I was not at that meeting. So I'll be relying upon those that were here for it to agree that it's an accurate representation of the meeting. Anybody not agree? Happy to agree. Great, thank you very much. So I will sign the minutes off. So then we will then move on to item number 6, the Elections Act 2022 update report.
Thank you, Chair. You'll see from the report in front of you that there are 3 recommendations. The first recommendation to note the data collected from the local government elections held on the 4th of May 23, and this is in relation to the implementation of voter ID and assistance with voting for persons with disabilities. That the subcommittee notes the level of government grant funding received and the spending allocation and the spending to date, and that the subcommittee notes the further provisions of the Elections Act. As you're aware, the Elections Act 2022 introduced new duties on local authorities for the management and running of elections, with the first elections affected being the scheduled polls on the 4th of May 2023. The new duties on local authorities required for these elections specifically related to the implementation of voter identification and the assistance with voting for persons with disabilities. Following the elections that were held, significant data was collated on behalf of the returning officer regarding the implication of voter ID and the assistance for voters. And these returns were compiled by each of the presiding officers, which were employed to manage each of the polling stations across the city. You'll see in section 4, and moving on to section 4 of the report, there's some statistical summary information there. The first section gives you the totals of the overall electoral turnout for those elections, being 50,744. The total number of voters issued with a ballot paper were 14,367. And the percentage of electors eligible to vote at the polling stations is 28.3. The next section identifies the total number of polling station electors who applied for a ballot paper and initially were not issued with a ballot paper. That was 115. 68 of those electors then returned to the polling station before the close of poll at 10 p.m. to vote, leaving 47 electors who didn't vote on the day. You'll then see in the next section the percentages. So the percentage of electors who attended the polling station were able to vote, 99.7 overall. The percentage of electors who applied but were initially refused a ballot paper, 0.8%. 59.1 came back and received a ballot paper once they produced the appropriate form of identification, and 0.3 who were refused a ballot paper at the end of the poll. And there's some brief information there of the impact of some of the new equipment that was purchased to assist persons voting with disabilities. You'll also remember from previous reports, the government implemented a new system, voter authority certificates, and this was an online system that was set up for those voters that didn't possess the appropriate form of ID. The service went live on the 16th of January, and it provided a free service to those electors who needed the correct form of identification to vote. 5.5 of the report states that on the 26th of April, which was the closing date for these certificates to be authorised, 286 applications were made for these certificates, of which 243 were approved, processed and sent to those applicants, which meant that 43 of those applications were not printed, and that was due to two reasons. One either being that sufficient information wasn't sent with the application form, or the photograph that was produced did not resemble the person in some way. On both accounts, that information and those reasons why was fed back to the applicant to give them the opportunity to submit that additional information or provide an alternative photograph. And section 6 gives you some overall comparative information on previous year's turnout of elections. So you'll see there for each of the city council wards, if an election was held in 21 or 22, what the comparison was with the percentage turnout for 23. And then the final column gives you the variance, whether that was increased or decreased. Moving on to section 7, just to summarise the new burdens funding allocation that the City Council has received. To date, the returning officer has received £52,897, of which 15,300 has been spent for the 23 local elections. It is anticipated that all of those funds will be spent. There are further items that need to be purchased, and also the majority of that spend will go towards the all-out elections in 24. There is a further grant that will be made available to top up the existing level. We don't know what that is yet. The timing of that grant will be around April. You'll see from the next section of the report in section 8, gives a summary statement then of the further provisions of the Act, together with the timescales for implementation. And finally, just to note, further reports will be coming to this committee, not just to make you aware or keep you updated on the Elections Act and the implementation of those provisions, but to also give you progress reports on the all-out elections, the preparations for those in May 24. Shane and I are happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Cookson.
Okay, a couple of things. It might be easier just to ask them separately. The one I don't know whether you'll be able to answer, but maybe you can go away and come back to the committee with the information, and that's in 5.6. You talked about 43 applications being turned away, either because they were rejected or you required more information. I guess what I'd like for the committee to have is more information about the reasons for rejected or the reasons that they were turned away. So if you've got that to hand and you can say, but you did sort of cover some of it, I'm not asking you necessarily for now, but something I think as a committee we'd like to know. Do you you want to respond to that before I ask my next bit?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair. Thank you for that question. The reasons were twofold. It would have been because either because the photograph that was submitted didn't resemble the applicant, or the paperwork, the supporting information that's required for those applications wasn't sufficient. But in all cases, the applicant would have been notified as to which paperwork wasn't sufficient and given the opportunity to resubmit their application.
Well, I do think it'd be useful though if you could give us the breakdown of that, so that we've got that sort of information as well, not by case, but in sort of sensible groupings. My other question was about the stats that you've given us and just trying to understand that. One of the things that you asked us as a committee is to note the result, the stats. So I'm trying to make sure that I'm interpreting these correctly, and then I want to just query something. So it's looking here that of the people who were initially turned away, 59% came back. So that, I assume, means that 41% of the people who originally came to vote didn't actually come back for whatever reason, which you can't possibly know. So I just wanted to check that I'm not reading that wrong, and therefore the 0.3 of the electors who applied for a vote refused is overall of the people that voted, or the people who are eligible to vote. I assume it's of those who turned up to vote on the day.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair. Yeah, that's correct.
And so my question that I really was interested in, that means that 47 people who wanted to vote, I mean, there might have been other people that we will never know whether they wanted to vote and couldn't vote, but there's certainly 47 people who wanted to vote who weren't able to vote in these elections. Recognising that's a very small percentage, I would want to make sure that we as a council are doing everything we can to make sure that every year we're monitoring this and we're making sure that we want that figure to be known. We don't want anyone who wants to vote to be turned away. So can we make sure that we're doing some actions around that, and one of the things this report doesn't seem to say is how we're going to continue that, how we're going to make sure that it's not just we've done it for this election and it doesn't continue, because I do think that's really important. And particularly with the nunnery by-election coming up, have we done any publicity around making sure that people know about the need for voter ID for next week's election? With that, I will actually be quiet now.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. The service, the internal electoral services, is absolutely committed to raising awareness, and we do lots of raising awareness campaigns to ensure that these new provisions and requirements are understood. We're also required by the Cabinet Office and the Electoral Commission on an annual basis to produce a public engagement consultation strategy, which we are from time to time asked to evidence. So we work quite closely with our communications team, with neighbouring authorities to ensure that we get as much information out to electors in a very timely manner to ensure that they know exactly what's required of them before they attend the polling stations to vote. And certainly we've continued that campaign for the nunnery by-election. So we've still got ongoing publicity on the council's website. We will be promoting that nearer the date of the election. So yeah, it's very, very important that we ensure that we have that level of engagement across the community.
Thank you. Councillor Dunham?
Thank you very much, and thank you. I know there's an awful lot of work officers have put into this, so really appreciate that. I did actually encounter one of the 47 who was turned away and unable to vote, and it actually was really sad. So it was a gentleman who was not born in the UK, but he'd lived here 45 years, and his wife doesn't drive, and her passport had been sent away for renewal, and it's his wife that was turned away and unable to vote because she hadn't got anything. You know, and he felt very aggrieved by it, and yeah, it's really sad. I mean, I think the 68 who were turned away and came back does show the sort of determination to vote on the part of our citizens. Will we be able to claim, money for the nunnery by-election? You see what I mean? So that's kind of one question. With the experience of last year, these further provisions, have we got the necessary detail from central government and guidance? Are they definitely going to happen to that timescale, or will we be waiting to see what comes out, really? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Denham. Through you, Chair. Thank you for those questions. The first question in relation to expenditure for the delivery of the nunnery by-election, any costs that are incurred to do with the elections and fulfilling those provisions, we can claim back. So we will be employing additional staff, particularly meet and greet staff, staff that will be able to give information to electors on the arrival at polling station. Any additional publicity that we want to produce to ensure that the residents of Nunnery Ward are aware of what the requirements are on election day. So anything that we can directly relate back to the Elections Act provisions, we will be claiming back for as part of that grant funding. And the second question, sorry, Councillor Denham, could you just remind me?
Preparation for the further provisions in paragraph 8. There's an extensive number of things there. Have we? Is the detailed government guidance available now, or will some of those slip, or are we waiting to find out?
The returning officer hasn't received any information to say that those deadline dates have changed, so we're still working to those deadline dates. What we haven't received is the detailed guidance about how we implement those. There will be a number of changes to our operational processes and procedures within the authority, and how we exactly implement those operationally, we don't have that detail as yet.
Councillor Stanley?
Chair, thanks very much. After the elections, the debrief, essentially, staff, for want of a better way of describing it, did anything specifically relating to this emerge from those conversations?
Thank you, through you, Chair. The information that we collect from staff on the day, no specific issues relating to these new provisions. We were anticipating that there may be some with disgruntled voters, but no, not significant issues.
Anyone else for any?
Thank you, Chair. I think it is worth noting, obviously we raised a lot of these concerns before, and some of them materialised, some of them didn't, and overall I think there was a concerted effort from officers to do as much as they can, so that needs to be recognised in terms of that. Obviously, in terms of methods of how we recording some of these instances, obviously those that were turned away outside the door weren't recorded as fairly, I think, as we were anticipating. They weren't included in part of the numbers. Maybe that's something to learn from going forward, those that were turned away at the door and then didn't come back, because I think it was just the ones that made it through the door that we'd actually kind of recorded. So it may not be as an accurate picture as possible, and I think my colleague kind of highlighted in terms of overall voter turnout and disparity between certain wards, and if you do the demographics in terms of that, and it does show that a more literate, more electorate is likely to turn out more as a result of this. Whether we can use this evidence as conclusive enough to kind of back that up, but the early signs are that disparity still exists, and voter turnout in some areas was still a little bit lower. But commend the work from the officers in terms of that, and hopefully we can ensure as many people get to vote as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Viaz. Yeah, I think we were all concerned about the uncertainty of, the impact of voter registration on the electorate, and with the short timescales to implement this change as well, how that would work out. And we're pleased to see that all the hard work of the officers has meant that we have had relatively few people unable to vote. Of course, anybody not being able to exercise their vote is, a terrible thing that we want to avoid. But I guess it could have been a lot worse. So there's 47 people who couldn't cast their vote. We I guess are interested to know, what the background to that is, as to why they weren't able to, and then also, is there any particular characteristic of those people that might suggest that this the voter authentication or the need for identification has discriminated against any particular group? In terms of sort of the data collected on the day, we've met the requirements and that the central government have given to us. But I wonder if there's anything to prevent us from collecting data that would enable us to see whether there's any particular group that is discriminated against through this new system.
Through you, Chair, we'd have to look into that, Steve, in terms of what the Electoral Commission guidance is and what data we can and can't collect. And there would be a question, as has been raised already, in terms of those coming into the polling station as to how accurate that data would be. So we'd have to give it some thought and consider that. The government is expected to, in due course, use the data which it's gathered from local authorities across the country and publish some kind of analysis of the findings of that. So perhaps when we get that, and that encourages further discussion and debate around this, they may revise what information they want to collect nationally, and we can have a look at what, within the bounds of what the Electoral Commission allows, that we can collect ourselves as well.
Thank you. Yeah, that sort of leads to my other question. As you mentioned, that the data that we have collected and other authorities have collected is being collated. So at some point there will be a report, which I guess would benchmark us against other authorities. Is that accurate?
I'm not sure. We don't know the content of what the government plans to produce. In fact, it hasn't been stated completely that the government will produce a detailed analysis of what level it will be. So we're in a bit of a wait and see in respect of that. But certainly I don't think there is any intention to benchmark authorities. There might be data in respect of the results coming back from each individual authority, but not in a comparative benchmarking way.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so in terms of the recommendations for the report, is everybody happy to agree to the recommendations 1.1, 1.2, 1.3? Okay, thank you very much. So we will move backwards now on the agenda. Thank you, Claire. To item number 5. I think this is the annual safeguarding update from Tom.
Thank you, Chair. So the report that I've brought this evening surrounds the annual safeguarding update. So we made a commitment to bring an update annually surrounding the progress and updates in respect of our safeguarding responsibilities at the Council. Included within this report is an amended safeguarding policy, which is attached as Appendix 1 along with a number of additional appendices. Whilst the Council recognises that Worcestershire County Council and West Mercia Police are the lead agencies in the county regarding child protection and safeguarding, the Council does recognise that everyone has a responsibility for protecting children and adults at risk, and that we have duties surrounding those responsibilities. Sections 2.3 and 2.4 in the report outline the legislation that applies to the District Council surrounding safeguarding of children and adults. And to inform the approach taken to safeguarding by the Council, we adopt a safeguarding policy, which is attached within the report, and explains the approach as well as provides information to employees about what they need to do if they have any concerns surrounding safeguarding. The policy has been amended to include updates surrounding domestic abuse, the complex adult risk management framework, the county's self-neglect policy, as well as contact information, updated links, and further information and resources, as well as updates to the safeguarding advisors within the authority. The appendices that accompany the policy provide further information around definitions of types of abuse, the roles and responsibilities of partners in the response to safeguarding, as well as some key documents and easy to follow flow charts to provide a quick and easy reference guide to staff. The Council has a group of safeguarding champions, which represents services from across the Council. They meet quarterly and gives an opportunity to review and monitor our position, to discuss any safeguarding matters or concerns that affect individual service areas, as well as discussing matters that affect the Council corporately. In addition to safeguarding champions, the Council has safeguarding advisors, and they act as the sort of experts who have additional knowledge surrounding safeguarding and act as key points of contact across the Council for any safeguarding inquiries or concerns should staff have them. Section 3 provides an overview of the training that's provided to staff. So we have mandatory training, which is applicable to all employees across the authority. This level 1 training provides a basic understanding of safeguarding related matters. So it covers both children and young people as well as adults, and is delivered either face-to-face or as e-learning, depending on the nature of officers' roles within the authority. Following a review in March this year, some colleagues will have job-specific requirements to undertake additional safeguarding training. So primarily they're in roles that are more customer-facing, and that will include additional modules such as child sexual exploitation and domestic abuse awareness, and that's due to be implemented later this year. All hiring managers are required to complete safer recruitment training, and that just raises awareness of safeguarding through the recruitment process. At the time of writing this report, 67% of staff were fully certified as having completed the safeguarding level 1 training. It is a mandatory piece of training, and the reason for the number being at that level is due to a range of factors. So the depot staff have training face-to-face, so they're done periodically. So there will be people that haven't yet had the training that started, and that area of the council does have a slightly higher turnover of staff. Section 3.7 just indicates the numbers of staff that have completed the various elements of the safeguarding training for adults and for children. Section 4 covers referrals. So in total, over the past 12 months, 10 direct referrals were made to social services by Worcester City Council staff. 6 of those related to children and young people, and 4 related to adults. There are a range of reasons for those referrals, which is covered within 4.1, but there were no particular trends or themes or areas of concern that were identified to draw members' attention to. In addition to the direct safeguarding referrals, a further 42 referrals are made by other agencies, but recorded on council systems as a result of staff being involved with those cases. Generally, they've been reported by the police or schools who have been either previously involved or the most appropriate agency to make those referrals. But it's where council staff have involvement with those cases. A further 22 requests for advice were recorded where members of staff weren't sure whether a referral was appropriate or not. We are expecting Section 11 audit by the Children's Safeguarding Board later this year. That audit assesses the robustness of our processes and the commitment to our response to safeguarding, including awareness, training and reporting processes. We do try and raise awareness of safeguarding periodically across the council. We do that through posters which are across all of the council sites, through social media, training, as well as internal communications. Leave it there, Chair, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Any questions, comments? Yes, Councillor Denham, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for running through the summary of that. I did go on to look at the safeguarding policy and came up somewhat short on page 17, paragraph 6.2, that the lead member for safeguarding is the leader of the council, and they are responsible for ensuring the implementation, consistent monitoring and improvements of the safeguarding policy and related procedures, which was news to me, I have to say. And maybe somebody needs to tell the joint leader that they have a joint role in that, as to whether previous leaders realised and fulfilled that function. That's probably not appropriate for me to ask. And so that kind of does beg a number of questions with regard to, member training. I mean, I note that 2 councillors have completed it. Well done them, and I won't ask who. But to be honest, for councillors to be given access to the learning platform is not that helpful, because to find the time to do it, and actually, our position is very different to staff, because we get members of the public that come directly to us completely unfiltered, and that can raise safeguarding issues, and without necessarily having the expertise or the training how to best handle them. I know I've had a couple of sort of case conversations with you, Tom, but I think, as a general principle, some councillor specific training, I think, is needed. And then looking at page 25 of the policy, oh my goodness, all those useful contact numbers, and how I wished I had had them before now. I've dealt with a couple of really difficult issues in the last month, I think, and have been sort of flailing around to even with my level of knowledge, that's probably not the right phrase, but I've been around longer than most and have contact, with parts of the healthcare system, but that is absolutely vital information that's on page 25. So firstly, could that page be shared with councillors as quickly as possible in the weekly bulletin? And then I think we need to add a recommendation here of to action something around briefing and councillor specific training, please. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, absolutely. I'm more than happy to. I mean, we'll be sharing the policy in its entirety, but if it would help to draw reference to that specific page of contact details, then absolutely, that's no problem at all. There is no mandatory requirement for members to undertake the safeguarding training, and accept that there is the route to be able to do that. But that's certainly something we can take away to explore how we can facilitate safeguarding training for all members.
Yes, thank you for the question, Councillor Denham, and I'm embarrassed that you had to point out the leader point. And I think that actually it is a reflection of possibly thinking about things differently at district, perhaps compared to county, which is probably wrong-headed, isn't it? At the county council, because there's so much information shared with councillors in relation to adult and social care. I would imagine if the training isn't mandatory, it's very much expected. But we clearly need to learn from our take-up rate. Reflecting on training, I mean, I think there's two things I want to say about training. Overall, I think I recognise that post the elections in May 2024, we would want to do some really quite deep orientation training overall. But in the meantime, I think we recognise that when the training is appropriately tailored, there is a good take up from members now that we are used to doing a 7 o'clock team session and recording the material. And I wanted also to reflect that your point about things you encounter on the doorstep, there's overlap between personal safety potentially and safeguarding, and potentially whistleblowing as well, where you talk about the useful set of links. And I've updated the whistleblowing policy and tried to put all the links in there as well. So there could be something that Tom and I could put together that's a bit bespoke, which is just an hour's orientation on a few key topics, perhaps at a higher level. And then the Learning Lounge module is there for those who want to do the deep dive. And we can see what that feels like and then review that post-May. Does that sound like a good way forward?
Thank you, Sharon. Councillor Stanley.
Yeah, thanks very much. The question essentially sort of hovers around what we're kind of talking about. We acknowledge the fact perfectly correctly that the council members, employees, volunteers and contracted service providers have an obligation when they suspect something untoward is taking place to report this. Are we content that the sort of the routes through to get that information correctly into that the in tray of the responsible individual are illuminated properly enough? I mean, clearly there may be in some cases and not in others, and that's perfectly understandable. People, particularly in terms of volunteers, there's we ask a lot of volunteers, and we're delighted that people take on volunteering roles. Do we though give them essentially the backup in terms of were they to discover something that they would want to inform a responsible individual for? Do they know where to go? Is that route clear?
Through you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think it was recognised that some clarity would be useful for all staff, casual staff, and all people acting on behalf of the council. We have included a sort of flow chart to try and simplify and clarify the position of what route to go and who they need to report that through to, as well as facilitating a number of different safeguarding advisors that can provide that more specialist advice. And the take-up from that has been fairly reasonable. I think the number of inquiries that were recorded over the past 12 months sort of would indicate that route is known to staff and is available to them. It is a requirement for all staff to undertake the mandatory training when they start employment, which again provides the necessary advice about where to go and how to report concerns. So I think there's sufficient clarity in place to direct people to the appropriate place to refer to.
Through you, Chair, if I can just supplement Tom's answer to reassure members that actually the induction process for volunteers is being given an overhaul. That's come from a number of sources. So, for example, the Museum Service, who are very proactive around volunteer army, they've been wanting to look at their induction training programme for volunteers anyway. HR wanted to look at that again in terms of placements and so forth, and health and safety. So we are actually refreshing the kind of the mandatory induction approach for volunteers. That would pick up all the new ones, and clearly we need to make sure then that we've rolled that out amongst the existing ones.
Thank you. Okay, up to Councillor Geraghty and
Chair, I just wanted to follow up one point, which was just in relation to the mandatory training, and I just wanted to be clear whether I'd read this right. Are we saying that although it's mandatory training, only 67% of staff completed it? Because that doesn't strike me as right. It's something's either mandatory and therefore it has to be done at the appropriate level, or we're suggesting that it's not mandatory for certain groups of staff, and that would concern me, because I think the staff employs obviously hundreds of people and they are the eyes and ears of the organisation, and if we are encouraging something to be mandatory, I think we need to get those rates up higher than they are.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, the figure is correct. It has risen slightly since the report was wrote. It's just above 70% at present. As I sort of outlined, there are a number of reasons why that number isn't 100%, some of which relates to face-to-face training that needs to be undertaken, which is undertaken periodically, so there will be members of staff that are awaiting that face-to-face training, so it will jump up in sort of batches. In March this year, a review was undertaken of all of the mandatory training across the authority, and what that did was to reset everybody's training position. So previously safeguarding training and all the mandatory training had to be undertaken once every 2 years. So that's been increased to every year. So there's still some catching up from people that have fallen out of being up to date with their training. So that number would have been higher. It's sort of dropped back down. But through the adoption of the new safeguarding policy, we intend to do more promotion to make sure that that figure does increase.
Through you, Chair, just to reply to Simon, really. Yes, I'd already made a note of it, Simon. It doesn't look good. I think one of the things we might need to look at is, rather than simply reporting the number of staff that have undertaken the mandatory training, as Tom says, staff go. We train people in like on a program basis. So it might be, and this is not to dilute the target, but to perhaps provide more accurate information. Perhaps we should think about having a target by which, a period by which all staff must have done the mandatory training. So if it's a new starter, it might be 3 months. And that way, then we can report on those percentage of staff that have missed the deadline for mandatory training rather than not undertaking it. Because if they've only just started the organisation, it would be rather unfair for me to ping them an email and say, why haven't you done this? And they would come back and say, well, the training, I've got my training booked, it's not for another 3 weeks. So we'll look at that, but you're absolutely right. I think, we need to, it's not good enough. Thank you.
thank you. Councillor Cookson?
Very, very minor point. First of all, I think it's really good that we've got such a comprehensive document for given that we aren't one of the statutory partners. So my my only gripe is from a children's perspective, I'm not a specialist in adult safeguarding, is the opening line of your report refers to as 2 safeguarding partners, which lets health off the hook. There are 3 safeguarding partners that are statutory, so the ICB should be listed. And too often, I'm involved in a safeguarding review at the moment where actually a lot of people in health don't think they've got a safeguarding responsibility. And so therefore, I think it's really important that we make it clear that there are 3 statutory partners, but I did like the way that this is very much, we might not be a statutory partner, but we're taking this seriously and we are cascading it, and I think that's a really, really positive thing.
Okay, we'll make that addition to so that the document is fully accurate. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? As has been reflected, I think, in the discussion, you know, it's a very valuable exercise to review these policies and make sure that they are up to date, and it refreshes it in our minds as well. And obviously this evening, you know, a number of action points have come out of that. So very useful exercise and well worth the time and effort that was put into it. So yeah, thank you very much, Tom. Okay, so it's everybody happy to note the report and approve the updated safeguarding policy with the amendment to increase to include health in the yep. Yep. Yep, going from May 2024.
Well, no, I've been thinking, I mean, members, if you don't mind me saying, we had a really helpful discussion this evening. I'm grateful for all the points being raised. I think the training point we should take away as a priority, because I was thinking we could call it something like working safely, and it could catch us up on personal safety, which I know the number of you have sat through the in-person training. It could catch us up on safeguarding, and we could refer to our other places of raising concerns like whistleblowing and so forth. So I'm sort of thinking of the content and how Tom and I and one other colleague could author that together, offer that, you know, in the autumn as a team session of an evening, and then we could see if that's a good format, because I am committed to doing a sort of a full training program post-May, and if that's a good session, then we can repeat that post-May.
Can I just add through you, Chair? I think also we should look at the induction programme for members, because the role and responsibility of the leaders is slightly different in certain areas than it is for a, you know, you're allowed to say normal member, if I may say so. So your comments this evening, Lynn, have flagged another area with me where you'll be delighted to know that both you and Marjorie are responsible, and that's with regard to signatories of our health and safety policy. So, you know, it's those sorts of things that need to be included in some sort of bespoke element when a councillor becomes a leader. There are things that need to be picked up so that they understand how the role is slightly different in places. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's yeah, useful feedback. Okay, we'll move on now to item number 7, the referral report from the Joint Consultative and Safety Committee.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the subcommittee tonight will recognise that reports are referred from our Trade Union Consultation Committee when they require a change to policy. So policy changes are approved by this subcommittee. And also members will recall that every quarter we attempt to review some of our HR policies, keep them up to date. We've got a plethora of HR policies, as has every large and complex organisation. But in this particular quarter, we've looked at the flex time policy and also our regrading claims procedure. So under one cover report, you've got 2 different policies and procedures. They've both been reviewed and discussed by the JCSE committee. So I would propose they're largely taken as read, given that we have member appointments on JCSE. Just to characterise both of them, the flex time policy is a common policy in local government. It is not a contractual policy, but it is one of the recruitment and retention tools that is available in local authority. And from the employer's point of view, it's a useful way to reward staff for working additional hours without incurring large overtime claims. So it's beneficial in that regard, and employees certainly find it beneficial in terms of their working arrangements. So it's not to be confused with hybrid working or flexible ways of working. It relates to claiming time back. It's a time in lieu sort of policy. The amendments we've made just strip it back and simplify it now that we have hybrid working fully embedded, and that policy is quite clear and in some cases quite prescriptive about service levels and levels of cover. All the flex time policy now needs to do is talk about banking time, recording time, claiming time, booking time off with managers and so forth. So that's the simplification. The regrading claims procedure, this is a product of having reviewed with West Midlands Employers Consultancy the council's templates for putting new posts on grades within our structure. And we have a process which is called generic role profiles, which was born out of the whole pay and grading review that was undertaken in our council in 2016. And as a consequence of that, we have just a handful of generic role profiles, one per grade, so that individuals don't have very, very bespoke job descriptions. They have more generic role profiles. And we asked West Midlands Employers to do a bit of a deep look for it, whether those role profiles were still working for us and whether there was enough granularity in them to address both, again, from a managerial point of view, the risk of grade inflation, and from a staff point of view, that there's sort of transparency about why somebody is graded one thing and somebody else may be graded something else. And again, one of the products of that work, which isn't brought here tonight because it's not a policy change, was to improve the presentation of the generic role profiles, so there was job evaluation scoring within them as well as the narrative description. So that's an example of the work that's been going on. But one aspect which is a policy change is the regrading claims procedure, which again, previously, if a member of staff wanted to bring a regrading claim, then the conversation that happened in front of the regrading claims panel, which was and still is a member of the leadership team, trade union representative and an HR colleague, the discussion that happened at the regrading claims panel was more of a narrative description about activities without much sort of quantity in that. And again, we're pleased to see we can reintroduce an element of job evaluation methodology into the discussion that happens at the regrading panel by teeing it up in terms of what are the weightings attached to different jobs and people understanding that that's how grades have been arrived at. Try to bring that science back in. But then the other important point from the employee's point of view is in the regrading panel discussion, if the panel and the employee agree that it is quite finely balanced and hard to judge, which we get some quite finely balanced scoring decisions, with the employee's consent, that can be referred for an independent job evaluation. Now, in our council, we don't have many regrading claims per year, so we don't consider this as a floodgates risk or a significant cost to us. It adds a degree of transparency and closure to the process, which doesn't have an appeal. So I think we see it as a beneficial change. And overall, what we're trying to do is just, again, maintain that trust and transparency in a small organisation. If people feel, ill feeling about jobs, it can be quite contagious in a small place. So I'm not saying that we are trying to address a large problem which we currently have, but we are trying to be fit for the future here, and we are pleased with the work that WME have done for us. So just to conclude, in terms of the regrading claims procedure and the other work that WME did, we ran through that in a formal meeting with our trade union colleagues, and they were satisfied before we then had the joint consultative meeting, which happened last Monday. Unison were able to join us. GMB unfortunately weren't, but they had participated in the previous discussion. And I'm hoping colleagues that were at JCSE would agree with me that Unison confirmed that they were happy. So it was on that basis that we concluded our discussion at JCSE committee, and so I refer them to this committee to be adopted.
Thank you, Sean. Any comments or questions? I mean, I don't know if anybody who's on the JCSC would like to add anything to what Shana said about that process.
I move the recommendations.
Okay. And any other questions or comments about the policy change?
It's not a question, it's a comment, I suppose, which is, I think, certainly sensible, and getting WME in to do that and give that external verification, I think, is a useful function. As you said, it can be a very contentious process if people put in claims and they feel that things are finely balanced. I think the process having the job families, the job groupings, as opposed to very individual gradings for people is also very useful. Those more generic role profiles that you spoke about, Sean, so fully supportive of the recommendation.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so if we can just vote to approve the two aspects, the flex time policy and the regrading procedure, just vote on them together. Yep. Agreed. Thank you very much. So item 8, I don't have any other business. So then we'll move to the item 9 involving disclosure exempt information. So we'll go
Just
offline.
ask if we resolve to move into the exempt.
All right. Resolve to move into the exempt item.
Julian will just